Zara Belwa was halfway through a busy afternoon when her phone buzzed. She almost ignored it. Unknown numbers and unexpected messages had never brought her anything good. But when she looked at the screen, her heart stopped for a second. The message was from her mother, Miriam. It had been years since they had spoken. The words were short, but they carried a weight Zara had never stopped feeling. "Come to dinner this Friday. Let's be a family again." She read the message over and over, wondering if she was imagining it. After everything that had happened, why now? Why would the people who had pushed her away suddenly want her back at their table? For the rest of the day, she couldn't focus on her work. Old memories came rushing back. She remembered birthdays they forgot, family dinners where no one listened when she spoke, and all the time she was made to feel like she didn't belong. Every part of her told her to delete the message and move on. She had spent years building a peaceful life without them. Going back could only reopen old wounds. But deep inside her heart, there was still a small part of the little girl who had always wanted her parents to love her. Maybe people really could change. Maybe time had softened their hearts. Maybe this dinner was their way of saying they were sorry. She knew she might regret going, but she also knew she would always wonder what could have happened if she stayed home. After sitting quietly for several minutes, Zara finally picked up her phone and typed a simple reply. "I'll be there." She took a deep breath after pressing send, unaware that the dinner waiting for her was not a reunion filled with love. It was a carefully planned trap, and everyone at that table already knew their role, except her. As Zara stared at the dinner invitation, memories she had tried to forget came flooding back. Growing up in the Belwa house never felt like growing up in a home. It always felt like she was competing in a game she could never win. No matter how hard she tried, she was never enough. Her older sister, Kayamika, was the center of everyone's attention. If Kayamika got average grades, their parents celebrated her. If Zara came home with top marks, they barely looked up. It was as if one daughter could do no wrong, while the other could do nothing right. From a young age, Zara learned not to ask for much. She woke up early every morning, helped clean the house, cooked when her mother was busy, and even looked after family errands without being asked. She believed that if she worked harder, her parents would finally notice her. She thought kindness and responsibility would earn their love, but it never happened. Instead, every achievement turned into another comparison. Whenever she did something well, her father, Gideon, would find a way to make it seem small. "Look at Kayamika," he would say. "Why can't you be more like her?" Those words followed Zara through her childhood like a shadow. She never understood how she was supposed to become someone else when she was trying so hard to become the best version of herself. Her mother, Miriam, wasn't any kinder. Whenever relatives visited, she proudly talked about Kayamika's beauty, her friends, and her future. When someone asked about Zara, Miriam would simply smile and change the subject. It hurt every single time, but Zara stayed quiet. She didn't want to embarrass her family, even when they embarrassed her. As the years passed, the words became even more painful. Whenever Zara shared a dream or talked about starting something of her own, her parents laughed. Her father would shake his head and say, "You're dreaming too big. You'll never be successful." Her mother would agree without even thinking. "Some people are born to lead," she would say. "Others should learn to accept their place." Those words stayed with Zara for years. There were nights when she cried herself to sleep, wondering what was so wrong with her. She wasn't lazy. She wasn't rude. She wasn't asking for special treatment. She only wanted the same love that Kayamika received so easily. But instead of letting those painful words destroy her, Zara quietly made a promise to herself. One day, she would build a life no one could take away from her. She wouldn't waste her energy trying to prove her parents wrong anymore. She would work hard because she believed in herself, even if no one else did. Her parents thought their constant criticism would make her give up. They never realized it was slowly turning her into someone stronger than they had ever imagined. And years later, the very daughter they had called a failure was about to walk into a dinner that would change everything. Friday evening finally arrived. Zara stood outside the beautiful restaurant for a few seconds before walking in. The place looked warm and elegant, filled with soft lights, fresh flowers, and the quiet sound of people enjoying dinner. She took a deep breath, hoping the night would be different from the painful memories she carried. A hostess greeted her with a smile and led her toward a large private table at the center of the restaurant. The moment Zara saw the table, her heart sank. It wasn't just her parents and her sister. Almost the entire extended family was there. Her uncles, aunts, cousins, and even a few family friends were smiling and talking. For a brief moment, she wondered if this really was a family reunion. Maybe everyone had come together to start fresh. She forced herself to smile and politely greeted everyone. Some relatives smiled back kindly, but others looked at her with curiosity. It was obvious they hadn't seen her in years. Zara quietly took the only empty chair at the far end of the table. Before she could even settle in, her father, Gideon, leaned back in his chair with a loud laugh that caught everyone's attention. "Well," he said, raising his glass, "at least tonight you finally get to eat somewhere nice for once." A few people laughed because they didn't know how to react. Others immediately looked down at their plates, clearly uncomfortable. The joke wasn't funny. It was cruel. Everyone could hear the insult hidden behind his smile. Without missing a beat, Kayamika burst into laughter. "Dad, you're terrible," she said, still laughing. "But you're probably right." The table filled with awkward silence. A few relatives exchanged nervous glances. One of Zara's older aunts looked at her with sympathy, as if she wanted to say something, but she stayed quiet. No one wanted to challenge Gideon in front of everyone. Zara felt every eye slowly turn toward her, waiting to see how she would react. Years ago, she might have cried or tried to defend herself. She might have begged them to stop treating her like a joke, but not anymore. Instead, she simply smiled. It wasn't a fake smile or an angry smile. It was calm, peaceful, and almost impossible to understand. She thanked the waiter who poured her water, adjusted her chair, and acted as if nothing had happened. Her silence confused everyone. Gideon expected an argument. Kayamika expected tears. Even the relatives seemed surprised that Zara didn't fight back. What none of them knew was that Zara wasn't smiling because the words didn't hurt. She was smiling because she no longer needed their approval to know her worth. Across the room, one of the restaurant staff noticed her the moment she arrived. His eyes widened for just a second before he quickly looked away, making sure no one at the table noticed his reaction. Zara saw him too but said nothing. The dinner had only just begun, and her family believed they were in complete control. They had no idea that before the night was over, the entire restaurant would learn a truth that would leave every person at that table speechless. After the uncomfortable silence, everyone picked up their menus as if nothing had happened. Conversations started again, but Zara could still feel people secretly looking at her. Some relatives seemed embarrassed for her. Others simply watched, waiting to see what would happen next. A young waiter walked over with a friendly smile and politely asked, "Good evening, everyone. May I take your orders?" Before Zara could even open her menu, her mother, Miriam, spoke loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Oh, don't worry about her," she said with a little laugh. "Just give her the cheapest thing on the menu. She can't afford anything else." For a second, everything stood still. Then Kayamika laughed so hard she nearly dropped her fork. Gideon shook his head with a grin, clearly pleased with the joke. A few cousins laughed along, trying to stay on his good side. But many of the older relatives looked shocked. One uncle quietly cleared his throat, while an aunt lowered her eyes, unable to look at Zara. Even the waiter looked uncomfortable. Zara slowly closed her menu and placed it on the table. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply looked at her mother with calm eyes and said softly, "I'll order for myself, thank you." Her gentle reply only seemed to annoy Miriam even more. "Oh, come on," she said with a smile that didn't feel kind at all. "We're only trying to help. We don't want you ordering something you can't pay for." Another wave of laughter spread around the table. Some people laughed because they thought it was funny. Others laughed because they didn't want to be the only ones sitting in silence. Zara felt the familiar pain in her chest, but she refused to let it show. She had spent too many years letting their words break her. Tonight, she wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. The waiter looked at Zara for a long moment. His expression changed. It was almost as if he wanted to say something but stopped himself. He knew exactly who she was. The moment she walked into the restaurant, he had recognized her. He had seen her many times before. Not as a customer but as someone every employee respected. Someone whose name was spoken with admiration behind the scenes. He understood immediately that the people sitting around her had no idea. Very carefully, he kept his face professional. "Of course, ma'am," he said politely to Zara. "Please take your time." He nodded respectfully before stepping away. Miriam smiled proudly, believing she had won another round. Gideon leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. Kayamika whispered another joke, making a few cousins laugh again. None of them noticed the waiter quietly walking toward the restaurant's general manager. He wasn't going to complain about a difficult customer. He was going to inform someone that the restaurant's owner had arrived, and that she was being publicly humiliated by her own family. As the waiter quietly walked away, Zara looked around the restaurant. The beautiful dining room, the smiling staff, and the warm atmosphere brought back memories that no one at her family's table could ever imagine. 5 years earlier, this restaurant had looked completely different. The dining room was almost empty. The walls needed repairs. The kitchen equipment kept breaking down, and many employees were worried they would soon lose their jobs. Every week another customer disappeared, and the business was only a few days away from closing forever. At that time, Zara was slowly building her own career. She wasn't rich, but she had worked hard, saved every extra naira, and made careful investments. One afternoon, she visited the restaurant for lunch and noticed something that most people ignored. The problem wasn't the food. The problem wasn't the staff. The people working there cared deeply about the restaurant. They simply didn't have the money to keep it alive. Instead of walking away, Zara asked to meet the owner. For hours they talked about the business, its struggles, and its future. The owner admitted that bankruptcy was almost certain. He had done everything he could, but nothing seemed to work anymore. Most people would have seen a failing business. Zara saw an opportunity. She decided to invest her own money. It was a huge risk. If the restaurant failed, she could lose nearly everything she had spent years saving. Friends told her she was making a mistake. Some even called her foolish. But Zara believed in people who worked hard. She believed the restaurant deserved another chance. Over the next few years, she continued investing quietly. The menu was improved. The building was renovated. Better training was provided for every employee. New ideas brought more customers through the doors. Slowly, month after month, the business came back to life. The restaurant that had once been almost empty became one of the most popular places in Lagos. Employees who feared losing their jobs were now building careers. Families who depended on those salaries finally felt secure again. As the business grew, the original owner decided to retire. Before leaving, he offered Zara full ownership. She accepted, but she made one important decision. She never announced it publicly. Very few people knew she owned the restaurant. She didn't want newspapers writing stories about her. She didn't want people treating her differently because of money. She wanted customers to judge the restaurant by its service, not by the name of its owner. She wanted to earn respect through hard work, not through attention. The employees understood her choice and respected it. To them, Zara wasn't just the owner. She was the person who had saved their jobs when no one else believed the restaurant could survive. Now, 5 years later, she was sitting quietly at a table while her own family mocked her for being poor. The irony was almost unbelievable. The people laughing the loudest believed she couldn't even afford a meal. Not one of them realized they were eating in a restaurant that existed because of her. And in just a few minutes, the truth they had never expected was about to walk straight to their table. The laughter around the table slowly faded as everyone began eating. Gideon looked pleased with himself. Miriam kept making small comments about how expensive everything on the menu was, while Kayamika happily joined every joke. Zara quietly ate her meal, speaking only when someone asked her a direct question. The more she stayed calm, the more it seemed to frustrate her family. A few minutes later the waiter returned, but this time he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was the restaurant's general manager, Kofi Aguiman. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, and every employee he passed greeted him with respect. The entire dining room seemed to notice him. When Gideon saw Kofi walking toward their table, a proud smile appeared on his face. He leaned closer to his family and whispered, "I told you. Someone must have complained about her. Maybe she's making the staff uncomfortable." Kamika smirked. "Or maybe they're going to ask her to leave." Miriam folded her arms and looked at Zara. "Please don't embarrass us." Several relatives looked nervous. They weren't sure what was happening, but they could feel that something important was about to happen. Kofi stopped beside the table. Instead of looking at Gideon or Miriam, he turned directly toward Zara. His expression immediately softened. He smiled warmly and gave her a respectful nod. "Good evening, ma'am," he said politely. The entire table fell silent. Zara smiled back. "Good evening, Kofi." Hearing Zara call the general manager by his first name surprised everyone, but before anyone could ask questions, Kofi continued. "Ma'am, I just wanted to let you know that your private dining room is ready whenever you'd like to use it." For a few seconds no one said a single word. Gideon's confident smile disappeared. Miriam blinked in confusion. Kamika frowned as she looked from Kofi to Zara and back again. Finally, Gideon laughed awkwardly. "There must be some mistake," he said. "She's our daughter." Kofi looked at him politely but didn't answer. His attention never left Zara. "If you'd prefer, ma'am," he continued, "our staff can prepare everything upstairs. We have made sure it is exactly the way you requested." Zara nodded gently. "Thank you, Kofi. We'll stay here for a little longer." "Of course, ma'am," he replied. "Please let us know if you need anything at all." With another respectful nod, he quietly stepped away. The silence that followed felt heavier than ever. One cousin whispered, "Why is the general manager talking to Zara like that?" Another relative shrugged. "Maybe she knows him somehow." Miriam forced a laugh. "She probably won some online contest," she said. "Don't make such a big deal out of it." A few people laughed, but this time the laughter sounded weak and uncertain. Across the room, Kofi stopped near the front of the restaurant and exchanged a brief glance with Zara. She gave him the smallest nod. He understood immediately. The moment had finally come. In just a few seconds, the secret Zara had kept for 5 long years would no longer belong to only a handful of people. It was about to change the entire evening forever. The room was still quiet after Kofi walked away. Zara calmly took another sip of water, while her family tried to convince themselves that nothing unusual had happened. Gideon forced a smile and shook his head. "See, I told you there was some simple explanation." Miriam nodded quickly. "Exactly. People are acting like it's something important." Kamika laughed, but this time it didn't sound confident. Even she looked unsure. A few moments later, Kofi returned. This time he wasn't alone. Several senior staff members walked behind him. Every employee standing nearby suddenly stopped what they were doing. The conversations around the restaurant became quieter as customers noticed something unusual was happening. Kofi picked up a microphone near the front of the dining room. The soft music faded. Every eye turned toward him. He smiled warmly before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening." The restaurant became completely silent. "We have someone very special with us tonight," Kofi continued. "She believed in this restaurant when almost everyone else had given up. Because of her kindness, her vision, and her hard work, this place was given a second chance." People around the room began looking at each other, wondering who he was talking about. At Zara's table, Gideon looked confused. Miriam frowned. Kamika slowly lowered her fork. Then Kofi turned toward their table. With a proud smile, he raised his hand toward Zara. "Everyone, please help me welcome the owner of this restaurant, Ms. Zara Balewa." For one long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The entire restaurant seemed frozen. Then employees all across the room began clapping. Some stood to their feet. Others smiled proudly at Zara. The sound of applause filled every corner of the restaurant. At the family table, complete shock took over. Gideon's hand started shaking. The glass he was holding slipped from his fingers. It crashed onto the floor, sending water and broken glass across the tiles. He didn't even notice. His eyes were locked on Zara. Miriam's mouth slowly fell open, but no words came out. She looked from Zara to Kofi, then back again, hoping someone would laugh and admit it was all a joke. No one did. Kayamika's smile disappeared completely. The confidence she had carried all evening was gone. She looked around the restaurant and saw every employee smiling at the sister she had spent years looking down on. Several relatives stared at Zara in disbelief. One uncle whispered, "She's the owner?" Another cousin quietly replied, "I can't believe it." Kofi walked back to Zara's table with a warm smile. "Welcome back, ma'am," he said respectfully. "It's always an honor to have you here." Zara stood slowly. She smiled at Kofi and thanked him with a simple nod. She didn't look proud. She didn't look angry. She didn't look like someone enjoying revenge. She simply looked peaceful. For years, her family had called her a failure. Tonight, without raising her voice or arguing with anyone, the truth had spoken louder than she ever could. And for the first time in many years, the people who had spent the evening humiliating Zara were the ones who didn't know where to look. The applause slowly faded, but the silence that followed was even louder. No one at the table knew what to say. Just a few minutes earlier, Gideon and Miriam had been making jokes about Zara not being able to afford dinner. Now they couldn't even look her in the eyes. The relatives who had laughed earlier sat quietly with their heads down. A few of them looked ashamed. Others simply stared at Zara, trying to understand how the daughter they had always underestimated had built something so successful without telling anyone. Trying to save what little pride he had left, Gideon quickly reached for the bill folder as the waiter placed it on the table. "I'll pay," he said in a nervous voice. Dinner was my invitation. His hands were no longer steady. Before he could open the folder, Kofi stepped forward with a polite smile. "I'm sorry, sir," he said gently. "There is no bill." Gideon looked confused. "What do you mean there's no bill?" Kofi looked toward Zara. She gave him a small nod before standing up. Everyone in the restaurant watched her. She looked at her parents calmly. There was no anger in her face. No smile of victory. Only quiet confidence. Then she spoke. "Tonight's dinner is complimentary." For a moment, her parents looked relieved. But before anyone could say thank you, Zara continued. "Not because we're family." She paused, and the entire restaurant became completely silent. "But because I refuse to treat people the way you treated me." Her words were soft. She didn't shout. She didn't insult anyone. But every single word landed with more power than any argument ever could. No one laughed. No one moved. Even the staff members stood quietly, listening. Miriam slowly lowered her head. For the first time that evening, she had nothing to say. Kayamika stared at the table, unable to meet her sister's eyes. Gideon opened his mouth as if he wanted to defend himself, but the words never came. How could he? Only an hour earlier, he had mocked Zara for supposedly being too poor to eat in a place like this. Now she was paying for the meal he couldn't even bring himself to enjoy. One of Zara's older aunts quietly wiped tears from her eyes. She whispered, "She became everything they said she never would." A few nearby customers who had heard the entire evening unfold began clapping softly. Then another table joined. Soon applause spread across the restaurant once again. This time it wasn't because Zara owned the restaurant. It was because everyone had just witnessed something much greater. They had watched a woman choose dignity over revenge. She had every reason to humiliate her parents the way they had humiliated her. Instead, she gave them kindness they had never given her. That was something money could never buy. As the applause filled the room, Gideon realized the most painful part of the night wasn't losing his pride. It was realizing that the daughter he had spent years calling a failure had grown into a far better person than he had ever been. The dinner was finally over. One by one, the relatives quietly left the restaurant. No one was laughing anymore. The same people who had watched Zara being humiliated now walked past her with embarrassed smiles and soft apologies. Some gently squeezed her hand before leaving. Others simply lowered their heads, ashamed that they had stayed silent while she was being insulted. Zara thanked the staff for their hard work and wished everyone a good night. Then she stepped outside. The cool evening air felt peaceful after everything that had happened inside. She had barely reached the parking area when she heard footsteps behind her. "Zara, wait." She turned around. Her parents were standing there. For the first time in years, Gideon didn't look proud or confident. His shoulders were low, and his eyes were filled with regret. Miriam stood quietly beside him, holding her purse tightly. Kayamika stayed a few steps behind them, unable to look at her sister. For a long moment nobody spoke. Finally, Gideon took a deep breath. We didn't know," he said quietly. "If we had known." His voice faded. Zara looked at him calmly. She had imagined this moment many times over the years. She thought she would feel angry. She thought she would finally say everything she had kept inside. But standing there she felt something different. She felt free. She looked gently at her father and softly replied, "You never wanted to know." Gideon blinked. Zara continued, "You decided who I was before I ever had a chance to become someone." The words hung in the air. "They told you I worked hard. You never cared. They told you I was responsible. You ignored it. Every time I tried to show you who I really was, you had already made up your mind." Tears slowly filled Miriam's eyes. "We made mistakes," she whispered. Zara nodded. "Yes, you did." She wasn't speaking with anger. She wasn't trying to hurt them. She was simply telling the truth. "I spent years trying to earn your love," she said. "I thought if I worked harder, if I achieved more, if I became successful enough, one day you would finally see me." She smiled sadly. "But I finally realized something. You can't make people value you if they've already decided not to." No one answered. Gideon stared at the ground. Miriam quietly wiped away her tears. Even Kayamika looked ashamed. For the first time, they were forced to hear the pain they had caused, not from a crying little girl, but from a strong woman who no longer needed their approval. After a few moments, Zara gave them a small, respectful smile. "I truly hope you find peace," she said. Then she turned, walked to her car, and drove away without looking back. Her parents remained standing in the parking lot, watching her disappear into the night. They finally understood that the greatest thing they had lost wasn't the chance to celebrate their daughter's success. It was the years they had wasted refusing to see the incredible person she had been all along. A few weeks later, the restaurant celebrated another successful anniversary. The dining room was beautifully decorated with flowers and warm lights. The tables were full, laughter filled the air, and the employees looked happier than ever. It was more than just a celebration of another year in business. It was a celebration of how far they had all come together. As the evening went on, Kofi stepped onto the small stage with a microphone. "I would like everyone to give a big round of applause to the person who believed in this restaurant when no one else did," he said with a smile. "The person who saved our jobs, believed in our dreams, and gave this place a second chance. Please welcome our owner, Ms. Zara Balwa." The entire restaurant stood up. The employees clapped with huge smiles on their faces. Some of them had tears in their eyes because they remembered the difficult days when they thought they would lose everything. Zara walked to the front of the room, smiling warmly. She looked around at the people who had become like family to her. Taking a deep breath, she thanked everyone for their hard work and loyalty. Then she shared one final lesson. "Success isn't proving your family wrong," she said gently. "It's refusing to become like the people who hurt you." The room became quiet. "I could have used my success to embarrass others," she continued. "Instead, I chose kindness, respect, and forgiveness. Real success isn't about money or business. It's about the kind of person you choose to become." A loud round of applause filled the restaurant once again. Outside the large front window, 3 familiar figures stood quietly on the sidewalk. Gideon, Miriam, and Kayamika. They watched from outside as everyone inside celebrated Zara. No one invited them in. No one needed to. For the first time they truly understood what they had lost. The daughter they had ignored. The daughter they had mocked. The daughter they had tried to humiliate in front of everyone, had become the greatest success story of their lives. Not because she became the owner of a successful restaurant, but because she became a woman of strength, grace, and character despite everything they had put her through. As Zara smiled beside the people who believed in her, she realized she no longer needed her parents' approval. She already had something far more valuable, a life she had built with honesty, hard work, and love. And if this story teaches us anything, it's this. Never judge someone's future by where they started, because the person you look down on today may be the one everyone looks up to tomorrow. My parents invited me to dinner just to humiliate me, but before dessert was served, they discovered they had spent the entire evening insulting the owner of the restaurant.